You'd like to think that the science is pure and that you can trust it, but you really can't, and you've got to question it. The one thing I can say about health, it's hard to gaslight somebody out of health. If someone loses 100 pounds doing a carnivore diet, it's pretty hard to convince them that that didn't happen. I am very skeptical about most things, but the only reason I've been such an advocate for this diet is because of the proof of work.
Welcome back to The Culture Bit. I'm your host, Alan Helm, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Shawn Baker. He's an orthopedic surgeon, a former chief of orthopedics in the U.S. military, and a multi-sport athlete who's broken world records in his 50s. But that's just the start. He's the unapologetic face of the carnivore diet, a meat-only movement he popularized alongside figures like Paul Saladino, challenging everything we've been told about nutrition. And if that wasn't enough, he's an avid Bitcoiner, spotting the same broken incentives in our money that he's exposed in our food system. From fixing bones in combat zones to rejecting dietary dogma and embracing decentralized currency, he's the perfect guest to unpack how culture, health, and Bitcoin collide. Let's dive in. And what I want to figure out today, kind of the big question, is how does a combat surgeon end up rejecting traditional medical dogma, embracing meat-only eating, and betting on Bitcoin as well on the long term?
Yeah,
So those are the things we're going to want to dig into today,
Okay.
but pleasure to have you on here.
Yeah, well, welcome. You're welcome, and thanks for having me, by the way. It's been fun. I find some of the Bitcoin folks to be the most enjoyable to interact with because they've got sort of open minds, and they're about, let's change things for the better. And that's the same sort of mindset that carries me through what I do with health. And to answer your question, how I got into all this stuff. And so, I was trained as a traditional orthopedic surgeon. I went to medical school, graduated with honors, got into, very challenging residency program, did that, went to the military, did my time as a trauma surgeon over in Afghanistan, and, was just practicing medicine as I thought. And then funny thing happened to my own health. I just was like, I've been an athlete my whole life. I've been a competitive high level athlete since I was in my 20s. And I still am. I still like doing that. That just keeps me from being crazy. I like competing and pushing myself. And I noticed that my health just wasn't where it should have been. I was 42 years old, and I was just not feeling real good. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. I'm busting my ass training, And so I started delving pretty hard into nutrition and, tried various different diets. The first thing I did was what we're told to do: low fat, lots of vegetables, lots of fiber. And I did lose weight. I mean, to be fair, I did lose weight on that, but I was friggin' miserable. I mean, I was tired and grouchy and hungry, and I was like, I can't live like this. There's no way I can do this for an extended period of time. So I kind of wound my way through the low carb sort of information at the time, and was doing that and doing okay. And then I came across these nutty, wacky, crazy people eating just all meat. And I thought, these people are friggin' nuts. I mean, they're like stupid. They're nuts. They're crazy. They're going to get scurvy. They're going to get heart disease. All the things that we're kind of taught to believe. But they had some pretty compelling just data that was going forward that I could not contend with so I tried it myself. This is back 2016. And I mean, I did it for a month, and I was like, I'm blown away how good I feel. I mean, I was just about to turn 50 at the time. And, as an athlete, you got some wear and tear, a lot of mileage on your body. I had aches and pains, and, things didn't feel great all the time. And all that went away. And I was like, shit, I feel like I'm 25 again. This is pretty cool. So I continued with that. I convinced I convinced 100 people to do it for 90 days, and we collected data on them. And all of them basically lost weight, got leaner, felt better. Resting heart rate went down by 10 beats. Their waist size went down. Every subjective marker that we could assess, because we didn't have a budget for this, but just got better. And so that got me interested. Joe Rogan saw that, asked me to come on the podcast, talk about this. Of course, when you go on Rogan, it changes things. Obviously, he's got a big influence. And so a lot of people were exposed to my craziness, and thought I was, some people thought I was, most people thought I was nuts, and some people thought I was evil because, like, the vegans, oh my God, this guy's advocating people eat meat. How dare he? I mean, we've only been doing it for 3 million years or whatever. So it's like, well, that's crazy that you advocate for eating meat. And then I met this fellow by the name of Saifedean Amos. You guys are probably familiar with Saif. He wrote the book, The Bitcoin Standard, and Saif's been at Carnivore for actually longer than I have. He's done it, I think, a year longer than I did. And he approached me, he goes, hey man, I guess he saw me on Twitter or something like that, and he approached me, and we met in person up in Washington State. In fact, he stayed I think stayed at the house for a little bit, and we discussed writing a book about this. And he said, "I got this other book. Let me just finish this other book right now. It's on economics, on Bitcoin." So, and that was a Bitcoin standard, which obviously catapulted him to the forefront of Bitcoin, some of the Bitcoin thought, I think. So then he got pulled in that direction. I was like, well, I'll just write the Carnivore book myself. And I did. I had a publisher contact me and say, "Hey, would you please?" After they saw me on Rogan, they said, "Hey, could you write a book about this?" And I'm like, "I guess." you know. So that's what I did, and so that's what got me in that position, and how I kind of got to know some of the Bitcoin folks. And no, there's another guy I'll have to shout out. His name is Michael Goldstein, or Bitstein. I guess he's the founder of the the Nakamoto, or Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, or something like that, up in Austin, Texas. He's been a long-term carnivore as well. So, and now there are quite a few Bitcoiners that do carnivore, as you probably are aware, maybe yourself included. So, I mean, there's just kind of this interesting synergy between the two groups, and people are like, they got this whole concept of fiat currency, fiat food, fiat media, all this sort of nonsense, and people are breaking away from that finally.
Yeah, the intersection between those who practice the carnivore diet and those who are Bitcoiners have almost come up together side by side with one another. I think the first beefsteak initiative that I went to was actually at a Bitcoin conference back in 2022, which was a ton of fun, right? You have a bunch of Bitcoiners who only care about their steak and then also want to talk about how the money's broken. And for me personally, that's like the perfect intersection of two worlds. um, but you were really the one who popularized this carnivore diet, and you mentioned that it was something you first started tracking back in 2016, right? So we've got almost, it's 2025. It's almost 10 years in the making, which is just crazy to think about. And you mentioned that the reason for looking into this diet was that you had a couple of health issues that were starting to pop up, such as inflammation and that sort of thing. And as a doctor and as a surgeon, right, you were in a unique position as you had all these other academics and all these other scholars and professionals, medical professionals around you that you could point to for advice, but clearly something wasn't working. And so what I want to dig into, right, is what were some of the things early on in your livelihood that shaped kind of this contrarian out of the box thinking mindset? Like what were the things early on in your life that made you open to other possibilities outside of like traditional um academic pathways?
Yeah, gosh, I'm trying to think. I kind of. It's interesting that I have such a contrarian view on nutrition, because like early on in my career, I mean, I used to launch nuclear bombs for the United States. I was part of it's my first. I was in the military twice. First as a nuclear weapons launch officer, so I'd sit underground, tied to basically 10 launch facilities, and had 150 nuclear warheads at my disposal. They don't give that to kind of crazy people. You just don't. I mean, there's all kinds of this personal reliability program and this sort of psychiatric screening you have to go through. So I've never been like this really like out there in left field guy. I've had sort of fairly, I would say, conservative thought in regard to a lot of things. It's not that I'm going to say I'm politically super conservative, but I think a lot of stuff is nonsense. I think there's a lot of BS and a lot of goofy stuff out there, and I dismiss most of it. I can remember most of my career in medicine, I had people coming into me asking me about some crazy, what about this crazy ozone therapy? And I just dismiss it outright, because there wasn't any good data that I could point to. And I said, that's kind of quackery. And now I'm accused of being a quack. It's kind of funny, because now I'm on the other side of that coin. So I don't think that my past was predictive of where I am. I've not always been this outlier. Now, I mean, I can remember when I was in the military, and I just didn't. I just said, I'm not doing that. It's bullshit. It's stupid. Like, I don't like to do stupid stuff. Right. And like, I mean, I remember in the military, I can remember this one period of time where I'm a surgeon, right? My job is to fix broken people, right? When I was in Afghanistan as a trauma surgeon, people get mass casualties. We'd be up there. We'd just be putting people back together. And I was, this is on the civilian side, and there was this like thing, and it was just like this nurse, and we were both majors at the time. I ended up being a lieutenant colonel when I got out, but we were both majors, and this one nurse, He had some, he had some responsibility for some like chemical cleanup drill. And he says, Major Baker, we need you to report to this so you can practice putting on your mop gear and get ready to clean up spills. And I'm like, that's a waste of my time. I'm never going to be doing that. If the shit hits the fan, I'm going to be in the operating room taking care of people. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do it. Let's just go get bent. I just kind of refuse. And I remember he went and go like told the colonel, hey, Dr. Baker, Major Baker is not cooperating. And the guy just, it's funny. The colonel says, you know what? Just ignore that clown. Just keep doing what you're doing. Because at least some people have some common sense, and I think that's a thing. I've been guided by results. And I mean, some of the stuff out there just doesn't make, when you look at medicine, it's just like, why are we doing this stupid shit? That's not obviously not helping people, and I think about how many people you medicate. I mean, this kind of humorous comparison, like this big fat guy that's clearly not doing well. And he's like, oh, my doctor said my labs look good. The pills must be working, right? Why you look like garbage? And you compare it to another guy who's like, hey, my doctor got me off pills, so my disease is in remission. There's a clear difference there. And so I think I'm guided by common sense in many ways and things that are results. Like, I'm very skeptical about most things, but the only reason I've been such an advocate for this diet is because of the proof of work. I mean, you at this point, 10 years into it, I mean, it's not hard to see people that are clearly better from this, despite all the criticism. And there's no shortage of critics. There's still people out there yapping about, oh, it's dangerous and we don't know enough about it and blah, blah, blah. We got to wait for the drug companies to fund the studies so we can say that, it's just, at some point it's just like to stop being an idiot and just realize, what's evident in for your eyes. I mean, I think a lot of times in Bitcoin, people are like, well, it's magic money. It's no value. And it's like, well, somebody thinks it's worth, $2 trillion at this point, whatever the market cap is on Bitcoin right now, somewhere close to that. So, I mean, there is that proof that's going on. So I like to see, results and proof, and that's what guides me.
To steal from Rogan, one of the things I've heard him say a lot is that when he's picking a doctor, he wants to make sure, physically that the doctor looks like a healthy person because
Mm.
there's many out there that aren't. And you're obviously, from a physical fitness standpoint, very well kept. You're a multi-sport athlete, absolutely jacked, which is awesome to see. You mentioned this, you're a results oriented person. And by proxy, obviously, you see that in the way you treat your own body. How does pushing your body inform your views on diet and health?
Well, I think that, we've got all this sort of, and I'm not the longevity guy. I'll be the first one to admit I have no idea. I don't know if I'm a longer, shorter. I don't really care. I mean, I care, but I'm not going to sit here and say, I'm doing the right things are going to make me live that, follow my like this Brian Johnson guy. You can take my stack and you can live for not die. I mean, it's such bullshit. I mean, it just cracks me up to see the people falling for that nonsense. But I would say that capacity, I think about what does it mean to be healthy and be alive? It's like having a big, broad capacity of things you're capable of doing. And so as I get close to 60, I mean, I'll turn 60, I'm 58 now. So when I turn 60, I'm going to dunk a basketball. I'm going to be able to do a backflip. I'm going to be able to run a sub 60-second 400 meters. I'm going to deadlift 600 pounds, all when I'm a 60-year-old, which is, I mean, I'm saying that I'm sort of manifesting because I've done all those things before. And I think I can do it at 60, which to me represents health in many ways. I think your physical capacity is probably the greatest indicator of your overall health. It's not your LDL cholesterol. It's not your blood glucose number. It's not your serum potassium or whatever the hell, methylated DNA. That's all fluff and kind of nonsense in a way. It's a great way to move supplements and to sell stupid tests that people don't need to do. So I think, if you can put up or shut up, I mean, it's like, oh, I can take a blood test. Look how healthy I am. I mean, whatever. I mean, look at you, you look like a fat piece of, crap. You're not healthy. Give me a break. So I do think that, and I know it's a lot of people, well, there's good coaches that weren't good players. Yeah, I get that. But I mean, really, I mean, if you can't even control your own body to the point you can get yourself healthy, then you clearly don't have a good comprehension or of what it takes to be healthy. And how can I trust you? And I think that's absolutely right. With Rogan saying that. I mean, no one goes to a broke, poor guy to get financial advice. I mean that's clearly nonsense. So I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that nonsense is driven by poor incentives. I mean, the easy Bitcoiner tie-in is poor economic incentives. But one of the things I've heard you say in other podcasts is that a lot of modern day science is now marketing, which is driven by poor financial incentives. Could you unpack that a little bit for the audience? When did you first notice that the science was kind of more about profit than truth?
Well, I mean, gosh, I don't know for sure when that probably changed. Probably to some degree, it's always been that way. I mean, science is marketing in many ways. I mean, this is why we do these things so we can point to a scientific study that will compel and sway someone to buy our product or believe in our belief system. So we have that, and so the incentive to cheat in that is very high because a lot of people regard science as some sort of almost with a religious like sort of affection that, oh, if the science says this is, and I'm a very smart rational person and therefore I should follow the science. We saw that during COVID. We saw a lot of questioning of the science as well, which I think is a good thing. So we have to realize that science in many ways is susceptible to uh, a conflict of interest, greed, malfeasance. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into that, and I mean, Marcia Engel, who was the editor in chief of the New England Journal of Medicine for many, many years, basically retired and said, "Look, I can no longer trust the scientific journals because it's so corrupted." I mean, that's a pretty powerful statement. So, I think we have to realize that, you'd like to think that the science is pure and that you can trust it, but you really can't, and you've got to question it. And the one thing I can say about health, it's hard to gaslight somebody out of health. If someone loses 100 pounds doing a carnivore diet, it's pretty hard to convince them that that didn't happen. I mean, there are people that'll try and say, well, you could have done it it could have happened anyway, or well, it doesn't really matter. And I mean, when you talk about things like climate change and somebody's trying to tell me the world's going to, as my friend Safe likes to say, that cow farts are boiling the oceans, it's hard for me to confirm or deny that on my own independently. I can't go out there and stand in front of the ocean and say, wow, it looks like the ocean's rising. No way for me to know. I got to trust somebody else that might have more expertise in that. And hard. But when it comes to my own health, I can verify that. I can tell if I got more body fat or not. I can tell if I don't hurt as much. I can tell if I got more energy. I mean, it's pretty easy to assess. So that's one advantage you have on this, and you can trust yourself more than you can the science because the science is. I mean, I can put together. I could literally just about anything. I could say that drinking paint thinner is beneficial to you. I mean, I could make that argument. I could probably find a mechanism. I could at least say it kills cancer because I guarantee if you put paint thinner on cancer cells, it probably kills them. And I can say, well, oh, this is clearly beneficial. We should all be drinking paint thinner. And this is what the science boils down to in many cases. We have some mechanistic variable that someone shows and they say, oh, that must be a good thing. Therefore, do this. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Paint thinner might have it might cause some bad things too. Why don't we count those things? Well, let's not look at those things. And we see that all the time. I see the critics of the carnivore diet. One guy, Dr. James DiNicolantonio, he's a guy who is out there saying, oh, carnivore is going to cause you to be acidic and therefore it's going to cause all these kidney stones and bone loss. And I'm like, yeah, you've got one mechanism which might indicate that, but there are probably 10 mechanisms which drive it the other way, which you're totally discounting. It's like, again, you have to see what happens in real world with people before you just blindly follow some scientific study. I mean, they're great science. I mean, this is how we sell supplements. We say, oh, look, there's a study that shows that if we raise our whatever level, that has a positive benefit, and therefore buy my supplements, right? And you're like, well, what is the net effect long term over people? And we just don't have that data. So, again, I'm very skeptical of most things. You'll find that. I mean, you ask me about most things, I think it's probably BS because it probably is, and we'll see what happens over the long term.
I would say most Bitcoiners by nature are pretty skeptical of most things. Like it's very funny. Maybe contrarian's like the right word, right? You could be in an argument with someone, and the minute you convince them of your point, like there's this proclivity to be like, no, actually, you're wrong, and I agree with you the other way. I don't know why. That's just like a natural thing I find myself thinking in terms psychologically. But I've heard you talk a lot about just continuing down this track of, economic incentives and health, and in particular nutrition and the processed food industry. Thinking from a first principles perspective here, could you walk us through kind of your view on factory farming and processed foods, and how warped economic incentives are driving the decisions that are currently being made for people on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I mean, it's no surprise people like to make money. I mean, that should not surprise anybody. So the incentive to cut corners, to use cheap ingredients, to use things that uh, may not contribute to humans' health, and may in fact contribute to human suffering at the trade off for making more money is clear. I mean, that's happened across the board. I mean, I don't know if you saw, obviously Bobby Kennedy's now our HHS secretary, and he's got. I mean, one of the recent things he's done is look at the GRAS designation. So GRAS, GRS, generally recognized as safe. So any kind of food additive that's been added to the food supply over the last 30, 40 years has fallen under this GRAS. And so basically what happens is food company says, hey, we want to stick some weird chemical in your food. And they're saying, well, what does it do? Well, I don't know. Well, let's go. We'll test it on a couple of rats. And if we think it's cool, we'll put it in the food. And that's it. That's literally the way products get on the market these days. The company does their own due diligence and says, yeah, we've shown that it didn't kill rats right away. So therefore it's safe for human consumption. I mean, literally, it's scary to think that. So now we have all this crap on the market that probably contributes to autoimmunity, cancer, mental health disorders, diabetes, whatever, you name it, inflammation. And there's never been any testing on this. The testing is a general population. We can look around the general population and see the result of this stuff. And so this is something that I think, and the reason they put these things in there is, one, they're addictive. They taste better. They increase the shelf stability so they can keep it on the shelf, longer so they can make more money. Because if you're throwing food off the shelves, you're losing money on that. So these are the reasons for that. And so we've got this, I mean, huge incentive to make money, and you can't blame somebody. I mean, this is what companies do. They want to make money. And if they can get away with that, people are going to do whatever they can get away with. I mean, I think that's a pretty safe bet. I think that if there's a loophole, people are going to use it, and they do if it profits them. They're quite smart about doing that. And so I think we have to sort of say enough is enough. And either our regulatory agencies get involved and say, look, no more of this bullshit, or the people. I think more importantly, and I think this whole Make America Healthy Again only works if people themselves decide that, hey, I'm tired of being sick and I want to be healthy. And so we just have to say, look, I'm not going to buy your crap anymore. If you put a bunch of carrageenan in the dairy products, fuck you, I'm not going to eat it. Just stop buying this stuff. And that's how we do it. I mean, we have to, all of us, 300 million of us in the US, or 260 million adults, or however many we have to decide that, look, enough is enough. We have to do this. And the problem is, you see this with like the SNAP stuff. I don't know if you've been paying attention, this food supplement, nutrition supplement for people on welfare, basically. And you've got all these influencers that are paid to defend Coca-Cola, right? I mean, this is going to be a fight. This is going to be a tooth and nail fight, legally, propaganda wise. And so we have to be resolved to say, look, I don't care. We're just gonna make the changes happen. And as you know, I mean, with the Bitcoiners, you have to hold tight, because there's been so many. I mean, look at Bitcoin. How many people have attacked Bitcoin over the years? I mean, it's everybody from the Chinese government to all the gold bugs and things like that all hate on Bitcoin. And the only reason it's still around is because the people in the Bitcoin community said, look, we believe in this stuff, and we're gonna hold fast to this. And that's why you have a $2 trillion market cap. Whereas, it could have gone the way of anything else, if somebody gave up on it.
Yeah, the toxic Bitcoin maximalist mentality has definitely played its role in defending against any sort of detractors.
You need that. Maybe. I mean, again, there's people that'll make fun of the the Bitcoin maxis for being too, but you need some of those rigid folks in there to hold the line. And I get that with nutrition. I don't really care if people do carnivore. I mean, but what I will do is aggressively defend those that do it as a very valid way of eating and living and improving their health. And if it results in just more people eating meat and then stop demonizing meat, I think that's a big win, right? So, I mean, again, when you come to, if you're looking at what does universal Bitcoin adoption look like, it's not everybody being a maxi. It's probably most people holding some Bitcoin. I think that's probably a realistic scenario. Now, we're gonna wipe out the dollar, and it's gonna become a way of the past. I don't know how likely that is, but I do think that because there's people that have been willing to say, look, I believe in this very strongly, and I'm gonna, whatever, sell my car and live down by the ocean, by the river in a van and just stack sats. I mean, those are the guys that are actually, moving the needle in many ways. The Michael Saylor on his crazy, whatever, just saying, look, I'm going all in, and you need that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Maybe the you mentioned RFK earlier. He's kind of the Michael Saylor of the he is the Michael Saylor, the Make America Healthy Again movement. And I know he was at Bitcoin 2024. I believe your first Bitcoin conference was also Bitcoin 2024.
Mhm.
Correct me if I'm
Yep, that's
wrong.
correct. Yep.
Did you get a chance to meet with him and talk with him at
I
that event?
No, I came on a different. I think I was there on a different day, and it was kind of funny because I was originally scheduled to speak on Saturday. I was supposed to be on a panel up on the stage, and they literally told me like Thursday, "Hey," and I booked my tickets for Friday afternoon. I'd arranged care for my kids and everything. I said, "Hey, we got to bump you because Trump is now speaking," with like a 2 days notice. And I was like, I can't change. Sorry, I'd already my schedule was already kind of tight on that, so I didn't actually get to speak. So I'm speaking this year at the one in Vegas. I don't know what day. I actually got to figure out what day I'm speaking on so I can book my trip. But I mean, yeah, so I got bumped by Trump. So I think that's pretty cool. It's like, okay, well, I got bumped for, the guy's now our president. So that's reasonable. But I have not, I was supposed to fly down to Mar-a-Lago to meet with RFK and Trump to talk some of this health stuff. But unfortunately, there was a hurricane, I think Helene or something came through or whatever, when it went through Florida. Literally, and they canceled the event because it was like, yeah, hurricane's coming through. So I didn't get to go. So I know I'm at, in fact, I think next week I'm participating in this Make America Healthy Again meeting they're having on the fat side, like cutting out seed oils or something like that. So I have kind of at least certainly a peripheral connection to that stuff, and I suspect I'll have more roles. I know. Like I said, I'm in the background. I've been working on research projects and getting them done. I know we're just about to launch a diabetes carnivore study, finally, first interventional trial, which I'm super excited. We've published a number of case series, which are good, and we're just kind of bringing that science along because it's something that, uh, for whatever reason, we need to do it. I mean, there's plenty of people who go carnivore without any science that's been published. I mean, we've had hundreds of thousands of people have done it now, but I think it's important to put that in there because I'm very serious about helping people. I'm not here just to sell books or whatever. I'm like, I want to see people thrive and improve, and let's turn this healthcare system around.
Yeah, very fact driven, analytical driven, data driven. I think more so now than ever, especially in a post COVID world, people aren't just relying on a singular source of news to inform them on their, health decisions, economic decisions, what to do with their family and kids. So that's really encouraging to hear. Um, Going back to RFK a little bit more. So he's really shaken up things. I mean, obviously, he had his successes early on in his law career, successfully suing Monsanto, and I think that win really helped propel him to where he is now as health secretary. And like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of, I don't know if maybe propaganda is the right word, but definitely big farming is going out there and trying to get a lot of these influencers to peddle, for instance, like in the Snap instance you referenced, like, hey, people need to have freedom of choice to ingest these seed oils. But the interesting part of all this, right, is on the flip side, we're seeing a lot of bigger corporations embrace like the no seed oils, be healthier movement. The best example that I've seen as of recently is Steak and Shake, right?
Mhm.
Going out on their socials and being like, "Hey, we're cooking with beef tallow now. What else should we do?" And that sort of thing. Where do you see this movement going in the next 4 to 5 years? Do you think there's a real shot for reform during this current administration?
I think, like no other time. This is interesting. I've never been really overly political. I usually think most politicians are crooks and they're just, corporate stooges and blah, blah, blah. And it's all this bureaucracy and it doesn't really matter. This is the first time in my adult life that I can recall actually thinking that, hey, maybe the political guys in charge are going to actually make a difference now. So I think if we're ever going to get it done, now's the right time. And I think the political will and the public will is there to do this because I think I think most of us can look around and see how the sad state of affairs that our nation is in. You know, we are a nation of fat, sick, depressed, weak, mentally frail people, and that's not good for society. We'll collapse if we continue that. So I think it's possible. Like I said, I think the nice thing that I'm seeing is, the younger generation. I'm this Gen X guy. I'm, almost 60 years old. I'm going to be irrelevant in a few years, another, I don't know, hopefully, maybe not too many years, but I mean, maybe 30 years instead of 10 years. But it does seem that this sort of newest generation is now starting to embrace these tenets. There's people who are saying, and I think, I mean, for all the poison that social media is, I mean, there is that element, or there's more and more people that are saying, hey, look, I'm not going to fall for the counterculture now is to be healthy, which is kind of crazy, whereas before it was like, smoke dope and be a hippie and hang out and, whatever. But so I think we're seeing that start to change. And I think we have to cultivate that and to continue to, empower these people, give them the resources, give them the attention so that they can influence their other peers. Because my kids, I've got teenage kids, they ignore me like, Dad, you're crazy, whatever, you're crazy, wacky dude. But at the same time, they'll listen to somebody in their own, peer group that might be sharing the same message as me. So I think it is very possible. And I think that, I mean, everything's a conspiracy theory now. You see that there's so many conspiracies, and, like a lot of them come true, so to speak. But I mean, there's this sort of, I mean, some of it's just like so outrageous that it can't possibly true. I mean, it's so I think you have to walk this line of, there's people just kind of capitalizing on the conspiracy theory stuff to the stuff that's actually legitimately problematic, and how to fix that. And so how to keep people not distracted and on point. And I think this is something that we just have to have someone that's out there saying, look, we just got to keep grinding in the same thing. And even though it gets boring after a period of time, because, quite honestly, once a conspiracy theory has come to pass, it becomes boring. It's like, oh, well, we don't care about that. So now we're on to the next thing. So we got to keep the attention focused where it needs to be focused over a period of probably at least a generation to make those changes. Because this isn't going to happen in a year. This is going to be a 10, 20-year project, I think. And so we just got to keep the focus on.
I would agree with you. The shift in counterculture overall has really, to tie it into Bitcoin terms, has started to embrace the low time preference thinking over high time preference thinking, right? And I think this is why there's such a beautiful intersection between health and Bitcoiners as a whole, because to be healthy means to do the difficult thing, right? Don't eat that piece of cake at dinner every single night. Don't eat that entire bag of Doritos when you want to have a snack, right? Have a structured meal plan, just like with your finances too, dollar cost average into Bitcoin and in that sort of thing. And so I think, within our circles, or what I like to say are two cults, because there's definitely some psychos out there that are advocating for us. I think that's really starting to spread, through social media and through friends and through family, this sort of low time preference thinking. In the short term, right? There's a lot of these changes coming down the pike. Do you think that Americans will have the correct incentives to put in place to start rethinking the way they look at their health overall?
I think it's in part depending upon how much education we can get out there. I look back to like the COVID pandemic, right? How many people in America did not know that you're supposed to stand 6 feet apart, right? I mean, you couldn't go anywhere. You could not enter a single store without signs everywhere and little things on the floor and wear a mask. And that message was ubiquitous. Every radio station, TV commercial, celebrities, government officials, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, blasting this message out there, right? So we have the facility to do that. If we were to say the same thing about, hey, let's just stop eating garbage, This ultra processed food, yeah, it tastes good, but it's killing you. I mean, if that message were given with the same fervor that we did with the COVID stuff, we literally could change this thing in a matter of just a few years. I mean, I think about the fact that, back in 1954, 45% of Americans smoked cigarettes, right? That number now is around 13%. And why did that occur? Because there was massive messaging that was, yes, indeed, sponsored by the government to allow for that. Now, again, they taxed cigarettes, they made them more expensive. So some people would have heartburn about that. It's just like, well, we should have freedom of choice. There's a lot of libertarians that say, just leave me the F alone and let me make my own decisions. And I get that. Now, like the thing about the SNAP thing is like, yeah, I mean, you can make that argument, but I'm paying for it. It's my tax dollars. I should have some say over to where my tax dollars are going to. I don't care. They can buy their Doritos and Coca-Cola and stuff like that, but I should not have to pay for that, right? I should have some say in that. And if I don't want people, because we don't give people SNAP dollars to say, oh, just go buy cigarettes, buy cigarettes, cocaine, and hookers. I mean, that is not cool. So, I mean, why do we say we can't restrict their junk food? Right. I mean, of course, the slippery slope people say, well, the next thing they're going to do is say they can't buy red meat. Well, some of those programs, you can't buy rotisserie chicken. I mean, it's like we can't buy hot meat. That's banned for whatever reason because they think people aren't responsible enough to go home and eat it. I mean, I can go to Costco and buy a rotisserie chicken, stick it in my fridge and eat it. But these poor people are too stupid to do that, apparently. They won't let them do that. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's like, so what was the point? Yeah, I do think that um, we are going to see. I mean, if the government decides and it's to get this messaging out there now, I mean, we're doing it on our own by social media. I mean, how many influencers are out there talking about this, and they are influencing people. I mean, I can tell you, it's kind of funny. My youngest daughter, she is 14, so she's a freshman in high school, and she has it's kind of funny. She says, yeah, a lot of the guys in my class follow you, Dad. And they're always like they're always like, oh, look what your dad said. And she gets pissed off because she's embarrassed. She's like, they're like, like, oh, look at your dad. But I mean, it is having an impact on these younger generations. And I think, we just have to keep up the pressure. We just can't relent. I mean, it's just like, don't give an inch, keep playing offense. I mean, for so many years, we've been playing defense with this stuff, and I mean, particularly I'm talking about with regard to meat and stuff like that. So now it's time to go on offense and just utterly devastate the competition. I think we just have to play dirty, play hard, play to win, and I think that's what it is. I mean, you got to just sort of be on message 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and be relentless with that. And I think that's how we do this, because if enough of us get together and do this, we can actually change the market. And it's market's going to change it. These companies will have to respond to market demands. I mean, if no one's buying their product, they're going to go out of business. That's the way it is. And if you don't like that all these people are poisoning you and taking advantage of you and leaving you chronically medicated and sick, you got to stop paying for it. And I think that's really the real way to change this.
For the listeners, could you walk through maybe some of the current incentives that are in place? I've heard you say this before, that there's no sort of James Bond villain figure in the background intentionally poisoning you, but it's more so that, hey, these are just the financial economic incentives that like the USDA has. I think one of the things I've heard you say is that they are incentivized to sell corn, right? And as a byproduct of that, we have corn syrup injected literally into everything. What are some of those financial incentives? And then, as you said, right, the talking about this, awakens up people to be like, hey, don't buy this product. And that kind of in the long term might adjust some of the way these big corporations are thinking about pushing products.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, United States has the Great Plains. We have the Corn Belt where we produce a lot of corn and soybeans, and those are our biggest commodity crops. I mean, this is what we produce in the agricultural sector, whether it goes to corn syrup or ethanol or animal feed or whatever. We've got a lot of it, and so there are very powerful congressmen and senators and companies. You've got the soybean growing associations and the corn refiners and all those people that have tremendous resource and money that leverage that with lobbyists to pass laws. USDA's mission is basically to sell commodities. I mean, this is ultimately what they do to support agriculture. And then, oh, by the way, they're providing our dietary guidelines. And so when your job is to sell as much corn as possible and soybeans as possible, guess what your dietary guidelines look like? I mean, it's very easy to see that conflict of interest there. I think they should be completely independent. We should have an organization that is not involved in selling corn, telling us what we're supposed to eat. I mean, it would seem to make sense. I mean, I think it goes down to just, how much money can I make? And what's the most efficient way to get that out? Every company in the world is going to do this. They're going to see where can they cut corners to save cost, and where can they maximize profit? And this is what the result of that is. And unfortunately, it's our food supply which impacts our health. So I just don't think I don't think there's a James Bond villain there. I mean, there's some people that are probably James Bond villains out in the world, and they probably try to do very nefarious things. But I don't think this is the overwhelming driving force behind this. I think I don't think there's somebody out there saying, "I want to make people as sick as possible, so that I can make as much profit." I think they're just like, "I'm going to make as much profit as possible," and if people get sick, that's a side effect of that. People get healthy, it's a side effect. It would be nice if they got healthy doing that. I mean, the food industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. I mean, you look at the worldwide foods, everybody has to eat. And it's like you have literally 100% of the population is your customer, right? Not everybody needs to buy Mercedes Benz. I mean, that's a small percentage, but everybody has to eat. And so you've got this captured audience. They got to buy something. And so you've got a really unique position that 100% of the world's population is your customer. And therefore, you're kind of stuck.
Yeah, a lot of these, I guess they're biomedical or agriculture professionals that work for big farm. They understand at a molecular level the molecules that get people kind of addicted to food, but I don't think they're really looking at like the second, third, and fourth order effects. Most people, at least, they haven't up until recently, where it's like, hey, this is just my job. This is what I went to school for. I'm bringing in money for the company. I'm a good employee. Do you think people in these professions are starting to wake up to the fact that what they're actually doing is really bad for most of the population? And do you think that they're going to actively, pursue avenues to take their talents in a positive direction? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I had somebody that exact same scenario. I had a woman who was a scientist that was a food chemist, and her job literally was to make food addictive. She worked for one of these major food companies, and she literally called me up and said, "Hey, I am miserable. I'm 60 years old. I've been doing this my whole career. My job was to make this food as addictive as possible, and I regret it immensely. And can I come work for your company?" I mean, literally, that was the plea that she's. I do anything. I'll work for free. Hell, to use my talents, because she felt so guilty about that. I not infrequently run into people that have worked in these industries, that worked in the pharmaceutical industry, the processed food company industry, and they all have this awareness that what they're doing is actually harming people. And they're trying to figure out, well, where do I go from here? How do I get out of this? And still, because, it's hard to say, it's great to have ethics and principles, but you still got to pay the bills and you still got to feed your kids. And they're like, well, I'm kind of trapped in a way. And so I know there are people that are there. So I think as more opportunities open up, that you'll see more and more people that are saying, look, I just can't ethically live with this anymore. And I think for those people that, maybe are just head down, working, doing the job, getting pats on the back by their bosses and not really paying attention to that, I think those days it's hard to ignore that at this point. I think there's such public awareness of how bad the food supply has gotten that you can't live in that system anymore and have that cognitive dissonance. I mean, you've got to at some point realize what you're doing is actually harming your own family. I mean, your loved ones, the people your relatives, your friends, to a point where I think people are going to hopefully, I say hopefully, um, step away from that and say, look, enough's enough. We're not going to do this stuff anymore, no matter how much you pay me, and there's other ways you can make money. Obviously, there's lots of careers that don't involve poisoning people. Right. So I think there's, I mean, I think there's a lot of options for that.
Definitely. One of the things I particularly find interesting about Bitcoin conferences as a whole is that you have a group of people that aren't confined to any single geographic location, and they're drawn in by this magic internet money that is born online, and yet they have a proclivity to want to conglomerate together in person at a specific location. And so one of the beauties of that is that these events don't just happen stateside. they happen internationally. And as a byproduct of that, you get a lot of people moving to different parts of the world, trying different foods. And so one of the things that I noticed, especially in like Europe, right, is that they, from an ingredient standpoint, have far less ingredients on a lot of the processed foods that they have. Like for example, the Fanta orange soda that they have in Europe doesn't look like it came out of a nuclear reactor. It doesn't have that bright orange dye to it. It looks more like orange juice. Do you think, and so kind of where I'm going with this is, the US is obviously at the tippy top of processed foods. Do you think there are other examples elsewhere that the US could maybe follow? Is Europe a good example of having some good regulations in place that protect the people, or are there better examples out there that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, when we look at Western developed nations, I mean, because you could say, well, what about Africa, where there's just do it? There's probably places where they don't have no regulations, basically, or very little food sanitation. One of the reasons we develop regulations is due to the sanitation issues people have. You go back to Upton St. Clair in the jungle and some of the stuff that happened at meat processing plants, and so these are some of the reasons I think the FDA was created in the first place. And the problem is it became corrupted. These regulatory agents became corporate captured, and so we have this stuff. And so I think that in Europe there's thousands of chemicals that aren't allowed to be in food. I think their philosophy is more you need to prove it's safe rather than us proving it's unsafe. You need to prove it's unequivocally safe over the long term, and we don't do that in the United States. We assume it's safe, and then 10 years later we're pulling red 40 off the food supply. Or that's one example. There's probably thousands of other we could probably pull off based on some of the concerns. I think that like when it comes to like for instance our dietary guidelines. So every 5 years, U.S. Dietary Guidelines Committee meets, and they're all corrupted. They're all bought off and paid for by processed food companies, and they tell you to eat a balanced diet that includes there are no bad foods, right? They literally tell you there's no bad foods. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's blue Captain Crunch, maple syrup, artificial maple syrup on there. How can that not be a bad food? I mean, there's clearly stuff that's literally rat poison on the shelves that no one has any business eating. I mean, I think this is not, there's no such thing as there's no bad foods. There's plenty of bad foods. So we have to get away from that. And I think, like I look at like our dietary guidelines that come out, they're very prescriptive, no more than 10% saturated fat and keep your sugar to this and blah, 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 and eat this and this. And I think we need to get away from that. I think in my view, like if you look at the dietary guidelines for like Brazil, for instance, Brazil's dietary guidelines say, don't eat a bunch of processed food, cook your meals at home, eat with people you love, avoid listening to marketing. I mean, that's literally their dietary guidelines, in a sense. That's all we really need. We don't need these people in there sort of trying to steer us into eating a balanced diet of lots of corn and soybeans, because again, remember the USDA's mission is to sell this stuff. So I knew we need to get away from that. And so I think we were getting into a message that, stop eating processed convenience garbage, cook your own damn food, learn how to cook, do it for your kids. If nothing else, teach your kids how to cook. We would do a lot better, with that. Even if you ate, cookies and stuff like you made them yourself, you're still going to do better off because, if you look at the definition of ultra processed foods, according to NOVA classification, more than 5 ingredients, significantly altered from the original form. And then you have stuff in there that you don't find in the kitchen. I don't have any, I don't know about you, but I don't have any polysorbate 80 on my shelf in my kitchen. I don't have carrageenan sitting in my refrigerator. I do in the foods that might be in there, you could, but I mean, as far as homemade stuff, you're not going to find these ingredients. I mean, unless you go to a friggin', chemistry warehouse or something like that. So I think this is the type of stuff we need to sort of adopt.
Yeah, education early on is definitely critical. As a young parent myself with a 4-year-old boy, I'm very commonly like, hey, going through the grocery store, he's like, Dad, I want to get the cookies. I'm like, no, we can't get the cookies. It's like, I know it tastes good, but I promise it's not good for you. And this is the portions of meat we should be eating on a regular day basis. And he's only 4, right? So he doesn't know any of these things, but it starts early. And a lot of onus is obviously on the parents, but I don't think you should also discredit the importance that our schooling, our public schooling systems should have in educating, young children and adolescents on the importance of nutrition. Heck, I remember when I was in school in the late 90s, early 2000s, the old pyramid, the old food pyramid that had like the entire base layer of just carbs. It was like eat a loaf of bread a day.
Right, yeah.
you'll
Exactly.
you'll be healthy. Um, how important do you find it for public schooling systems to revamp kind of the nutrition classes that they have? They seem very outdated. I don't even think most schools even teach nutrition anymore at this point.
Well, I mean, public schools, I mean, their cafeteria basically is constrained by USDA recommendations. This is why it's so important to have a solid set of guidelines out there. And you're right. I mean, it's just like, it's massive amount of carbohydrates, massive amount of grains. And the reason for that is because we sell a lot. This is what we produce agriculturally in the US. And so we've got to sell that stuff. And so it makes its way into the guidelines for good or bad. And I would argue mostly for bad. I think your point about kids, I've got four children, and when my kids could, as soon as they could comprehend this stuff, as soon as they could read a label, and they were like, "Daddy, I want this," I said, "Go look at let's see what's on the label." I was looking there, and I just use sugar as an example, not to uniquely vilify sugar, because seed oils are a little tough to comprehend for a 4-year-old, but sugar is not so hard. And I say, "Well, how much sugar is in that package?" And I would say, "Well, do you think you need to be eating 12 grams of sugar per serving?" And then they would come back and, "Oh, okay." And then they go look for something with less sugar. And we would just kind of get that in there. And then, like my daughter now is quite a good athlete. And I was like, okay, you need, let's say you need 130 grams of protein base because you're 130 pounds. How would you make that meal? And we would go to, this is the exercise we do in the grocery. Okay, I want you to find me a day, 130 grams of protein, how you would make that up. And so then she'd start to realize that, oh, if I'm going to have to eat more meat, and so, to realistically get that, to meet that. So I think it's important to teach your kids, both at home and in the schools, that these what we consume affects us. How does you get a tummy ache, or more importantly, you're going to friggin' be depressed. You're going to think you need to cut your penis off, or something like that, because your brain isn't working right. I mean, I do think some of this crazy stuff, we've got such a high percentage of kids that are on ADHD meds, that are autistic, that are um, depressed, drug addicted, enormous. And I think nutrition and not having a functioning brain, because all you're feeding is yourself is 70% ultra processed crap, is definitely impacting those stats. And so we've got to turn that around. And so obviously the primary responsibility falls upon the parents. You can't outsource it to the schools, and you've got to, put the schools to the feet to the fire. If you're in a, typical classroom where the obese teacher rewards your kids for good behavior by giving them candy, which happens all the time, that's unacceptable in my view. I mean, I think you've got to, the problem is a lot of these schools have been sort of bought into this plant-based nonsense, which I think is equally as harmful. I mean, we're seeing, more and more studies coming out there showing that a plant-based diet is literally damaging children's brains. It's damaging their growth potential. I mean, this is clear. I know the vegans will adamantly oppose that, and they'll point to these, studies from the American Academy of Dietitians and Nutritionists saying that, oh, it's safe for all ages and stages. And oh, by the way, the 3 authors of that study were all ethical vegans, one of which is dead, died of cancer at 52. But they're, it's just like this stuff is very corrupt. And so we have to realize that it is critically important for your kids to get plenty of animal products, including animal fats, in their nutrition, so that their brain actually develops correctly, so they grow appropriately. Gosh, it's so important at the early ages. And you got to keep them away from this sort of poisonous plant-based thinking, in my view. Obviously, get rid of the garbage is number one, but don't fall for the, we're going to all eat vegetables and be happy, and it's going to be a Disney movie, because that's not the reality either.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Baker, I know we're coming up here on time. I do have one more question I want to ask you, but to tie up that last point, one of the old sayings in Bitcoin circles used to be "do your own research." I think is especially applicable in the nutrition sense. I think everything you're doing, going on these podcasts, talking about ways to look at nutrition and your health and maximizing your day to day is especially important. And part of that includes going to conferences, and specifically the Bitcoin conference. Now, I know you mentioned last year that you were unfortunately bumped by President Trump, albeit it is kind of cool to be able to say that you're like, hey, I was bumped by the president of the United States. But you're a Bitcoiner by heart as well. And so you're coming back later this May to talk at Bitcoin 2025. What can listeners expect you to talk about? Have you thought about that much at all yet? There's obviously a ton of intersection there between health and finance.
You know, I haven't really been given a topic, or I don't even know when I'm speaking yet. So I guess I got to contact the guys to figure out how much time I have on. So I might be on a panel. So it'll probably be, I suspect, just answering whatever questions come up at the time. I mean, obviously, I'm going to advocate for people to eat more meat, if given the opportunity. I do think that we have to take a hard look at, you know, how this is affecting us in a societal fashion. Like I said, when we have 25% of the population with mental health disorders, it doesn't make for a very effective, a functioning society. If every fourth person you run into is mentally ill, you can imagine the odds of those two people running into each other. It doesn't take too long when you got two mentally ill people screaming at each other. So we've got to figure out how to figure out how to improve that. So I do think this is, the Make America Healthy movement is germane to that for sure. I do think that Make America Healthy again does not mean turning everybody into vegans. I mean, I think that's the opposite impact. So I think I'm going to strongly advocate for not necessarily everybody goes carnivore. I think carnivore is a very important therapeutic tool, and I will defend that, very, very vigorously. But I do think that we need to realize that meat is indeed a health food, and we should not be villainizing that. And I think because we've done that, we have largely created a lot more problems because we've, with whether it was through good intentions, a lot of times those through good intentions, we end up destroying things. And I think that may be one of these situations where maybe it's good intentions, maybe it's just greed and profit that did that. I don't know for sure. I think maybe a little combination of both. So that I, like I said, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. If you see me walking around, grab me and say, "Hey, let's chat." I'm not particularly aloof or anything like that. I'm happy to talk to whoever, and I enjoy it. I enjoy chatting and meeting people. So look forward to seeing folks, you and others at the Bitcoin 2025 in Las Vegas. So should be fun.
Yeah, excited to see you there, Dr. Baker. One last thing I wanted to show you, and just to show the audience how intertwined the carnivore diet is with Bitcoin. There's going to be at Bitcoin 2025 a recreation of a steak with diamonds. That I'm not sure if you've seen this video, Dr. Baker, but Tino, maybe you can pull it up and just show it, show it real quick.
That's nice. Got the guy in the butcher paper there. So look at that diamond encrusted ribeye steak. Beautiful.
Well, I just wanted to show you that. But Dr. Baker, it's been a pleasure. I definitely want to make sure I say hello to you in Vegas,
Yeah, for sure.
and would like to catch up down the line in the future, see how things are going with the Maha movement. Things are going with you and your business.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Alan. Take care. I look forward to seeing you in a couple
Appreciate you.
months.